episode 3 of The Heart of, where we talk about the heart of a game or a movie. And for this episode, I'd like to talk about Final Fantasy VII and the ideas of grief. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Final Fantasy VII is a monumental RPG, and it's known for a lot of things, whether it's cinematic storytelling or its electric gameplay. But I really wanted to touch on my favorite element of the game, which is how it handles grief and how some characters take grief in a direction and they try to do something that they consider positive, or they take that and try to harm people, and how these characters work on their grief and how it plays out in the grander story. So before I jump into the characters, let me set the stage of what this world is like. Final Fantasy VII takes place in the science fiction world of Midgar. Midgar is this city in the middle of this barren wasteland. And how it is you have a bottom level, which is where the poor people live. You have an upper level, which is where the rich people live. And what's dividing them is if you are on the bottom, there is no night sky. You know, there are parts of it where you can kind of glimpse it, but ultimately you have this giant pizza over your head, over lack of a better term, and this people living above it. And when you're down below in the slums, the water's not great, the food's not great, you're just meeking out this existence. Midgar is governed by the Shinra Power Company, and they're a very shady company that have too much control and too much power. They have military forces with their own ranks, and starting with like guards and soldiers to their upper rank, which is soldier first class. And you have your villain pulled from the rank of soldier first class. Now that we kind of have an idea of what the world is like, let's jump into the characters. The main character in this story is Cloud Strife, a former soldier first class, or so he thinks, is running a mission with a terrorist group called Avalanche when we first meet him in the beginning of the game. And he and the group are working towards blowing up these reactors that are causing a lot of problems for Midgar, and essentially taking the planet's resources, which they call the life stream, is where people go when they die, and they're taking the life stream and they're absorbing it and they're using it for their own good, or for their own greed. And just how companies think of, like, Shinra is like most corporations today, incredibly greedy, and they're not doing things for the benefit of humanity. If it happens to do something good for other people, it's by accident. So they're on their way to blow up this reactor. Cloud is accompanied by their leader, Barret, Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge. And Cloud is already not on a good foot with them. Like, he's doing this for the money. He doesn't believe in their mission. Barret is also very, suspicious of Cloud as someone who had served with Shinra. Barret's like, could he really be trusted? Cloud doesn't necessarily have memory of his past, and at the moment we don't know why. He believes that he was a soldier first class, and when the mission is completed, Cloud is not interested in hanging around. So when they go back to the lower levels, they meet at this bar called Seventh Heaven, and it's run by Cloud's childhood friend Tifa Lockhart. And when Cloud was a young boy, he made a promise that he was going to go off and be soldier first class, and Tifa, made him swear if she was ever in a bind, to come back for me. Cloud, said yes, that he would do that. So back he is to help his friend out, and through convincing, through coaxing, Tifa convinces Cloud to help out. And you might be thinking, well, Michael, when's the idea of grief come to this? Well, think about it this way. The idea of grief comes into play with Cloud of the loss of his past. He doesn't remember truly who he is. And when you know more about his past and what he's lost, then it hurts even more because they took him and mangled him. We'll come back to Cloud later, but we're going to go further into the other characters. So, as I talked about before, you have Barrett. Barrett takes care of a young girl named Marlene. His friend Dyne died. Barrett is tired of seeing the planet used and abused, and his home just constantly just destroyed and just shat upon. So in Barrett's eyes, he's taking this pain, this anger, this grief, and how can I use it to strike back and to make the world a better place? Barrett doesn't understand, though, that even though his eco-terrorism is coming from a place where he wants the world to be better, ultimately people still get hurt. And good people still get hurt. Not everyone in Midgar is joining up with Shinra, even if they're on the upper crust. Shinra doesn't have everyone in their pocket. So when he blows up these reactors, there's a chance that he can hurt someone who's just living their life. And this idea of that, like, it might, in his eyes, might be a righteous grief, it's still lashing out and hurting some innocent people. Then you have Tifa. Tifa runs Seventh Heaven, and when she was a young woman, her village was destroyed by Shinra, particularly Soldier First Class Sephiroth. Now, Sephiroth, it's a name I have a hard time saying, so forgive me, is someone who burnt her home village down to the ground and killed everyone. So Tifa harbors this, I'm doing this because my home, my family, everyone I know and love was killed. And just like Barrett, not as blindly as Barrett, but is like, I'm doing this for a justified reason. Then you have Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge, who are ultimately following Barrett's lead and believe in the mission, ultimately, that, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is a righteous cause. We have to destroy the Shinra Power Company because they are destroying our planet, they're destroying our home, and their own internalized grief of this is the right thing to do. Now you have someone named Yuffie, who is this ninja who comes from a far-off land called Wutai. Now the Shinra Power Company has so much sway and control that they can wage wars. So they've gone to this neighboring nation, Wutai, and for their resources, they've gone to war with them. So Yuffie grieves over her home and doing things and making sure that she can survive and stay afloat because she has no home. The biggest thing is that she's a child. She doesn't understand how to compartmentalize these feelings, and she's just doing her best and trying to survive. So she steals something in the world called materia. Materia is what gives people their powers and magic. Like every Final Fantasy game, there has to be magic. Materia is what gives people magic. And it's a resource that Shinra, uses the life stream, essentially the Earth's resources to create. And that's what Avalanche wants to stop. Then you have the Flower Girl. So when Cloud does his first mission, um, he runs into this young woman selling flowers. It's a very iconic shot in the beginning of the game where, you know, the camera's pulling out to see Midgar, and you see this young woman selling flowers, and you know her grief is just seeing this planet suffer, and knowing that she is the special young woman. Now, the thing with Aerith is she is not a normal girl. She is the last of the ancients, which was this race that existed on Midgar long ago and were essentially wiped out when this meteor landed on the planet and killed everyone. So the meteor is called Jehovah, and the Shinra Power Company takes it thinking it was an ancient, and ultimately it was not, and they take cells from Jehovah and they run these experiments and they create monsters like Sephiroth. More on him later. So the biggest thing with Aerith is she's this pure, innocent being who's just trying to make the world a better place, and her grief comes from watching this planet die. It's a lot of commonality with grief and seeing people grieve over the same things. It's like a shared collective grief and pain that people have, whether it's grief of a person, grief of a planet, or grief of a home. It's something that bonds these characters together. You have a character named Vincent Valentine, who Cloud finds in the basement of the Shinra Manor, who grieves his past mistakes and the loss of a woman he loves. Um, they find an experiment. Think, think a intelligent panther that's red, and they Shinra affectionately calls him Red 13. He grieves the loss of his home, but also lives in shame of his father, who he thinks was a coward. Um, and even Sephiroth. Now, Sephiroth lives his entire life as soldier first class, of thinking that, you know, he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, and discovering that he wasn't a normal child, and that he, was created, and that he potentially might be a monster that Shinra created, makes him go crazy, and he takes that grief and he projects it outward, and he wants to burn everything to the ground. And this idea of pain and how he takes that grief and turns it into pain is, we all have these choices of how we can grieve. And Sephiroth takes it and puts it in this awful place. Now, going back to Cloud, we talked about how his past is gone. He doesn't really remember, and the memories he thinks he has aren't really his. In fact, they're his friend Zack. Zack was the soldier first class, who, when Sephiroth goes crazy and burns down Tifa's village, Zack is the one that stops him alongside Cloud. Now, Cloud has these memories where it's like, I was there, I was here, and they're not entirely his past. He was there, but not in the capacity he thinks he was there. So, when he thinks back on Sephiroth, yeah, he was there and he helped Zack stop him, but he didn't, wasn't everything. And Zack's biggest grief is that he dies defending Cloud in his home and doing and essentially asking Cloud, "Can you be my living legacy?" And Cloud's grief is, how do you hold on to that mantle? How are you someone's living legacy? That's an interesting question. I lost my dad in 2022, and I always said to myself I wanted to be his living legacy. But what does that mean? What does it mean to be someone's living legacy? Doing things that they would want you to do, or things that you think would make them happy? I honestly don't know. But all these characters, the grief they feel, how they turn that pain into doing something good, like trying to save the planet, even if sometimes it leads to something bad, or taking that grief and just turning it into blind rage. I think it's interesting that a game that came out in the 90s can touch upon so many things of corporate greed, grief, trauma, and healing, pain, taking that pain and how it may affect others, passing that grief into pain onto others, and coming together. This is an RPG that you can spend 100 hours on. So, my simplistic retelling of these characters' story arcs doesn't even come close to what this game is about. And if you can, I highly recommend playing it. There's a remake, there's a remaster. It's a very accessible game, and it's a very popular game. So, even though I've kind of skimped around and I kind of gave the half version of some of these storylines, I kind of wanted to keep it vague because I think it's important to experience this without knowing all the twists and turns, especially when it comes to how grief is. And what I find so fascinating about it is that grief that I think these characters feel could be a very different grief that you think these characters feel if you decide to play this game. Um, what's fascinating is the series creator, Final Fantasy Hironobu Sakaguchi, his mother died. And a lot of the twists, the life stream, the character's grief came with, how do I heal from this? How do characters heal from their grief, from their pain and trauma? Some characters do. Cloud eventually heals. Tifa eventually heals. Sephiroth can't heal. He can't comprehend that what was done to him, while unjust, can't can't live with it, so that pain has to be delivered on other people. And so you have his story and why he needs to be stopped. Some characters don't make it, and our party grieves the losses that they take throughout this journey. But that's what I find so fascinating about this game, is how one deals and moves on from grief, and how does one keep living each day holding on to this grief. Zack asks Cloud, "Will you be my living legacy?" Cloud has to live each day when he realizes that the memories he's holding on to are not his, but Zack's. That he has to be his living legacy. It's an interesting idea, and I highly implore you to explore this game yourself and derive your own meaning from it. Well, thanks for sticking around for my all over the place podcast. I hope you have a great day.